and let's talk about the wonderful world of politics and education. The government's involvement with the education of our citizenry. This is finishing up chapter 16. We talked about income. We talked about welfare. So now we want to talk about education and politics. If you remember from one of the Module 4 quizzes, an important principle in the American mindset is that there be an equality of opportunity for every individual. And this is an ideal that every person should have a decent chance to succeed, but if they make an effort. So it's not the idea that everybody is entitled to be taken care of by the government or by someone else. It's the idea that if someone works hard and they put effort into their career, their pursuits, no matter where they began, whether they started out dirt poor or middle class or filthy rich. Of course, those that are born into wealth have a big advantage already, but those that are from the middle class and the poor class have the opportunity to succeed. So this ideal is fundamental in our American philosophy to education. It does have an element of ethical fairness to it. You know, the idea that Americans want to be successful in life, not necessarily that success just means wealthy, but living life with a sense of purpose and making a difference, and maybe becoming wealthy, like as many individuals do, but maybe just simply if someone was born into a poor family, maybe they're able to hire themselves up or lift themselves up to the middle class. That would be considered successful. Abraham Lincoln encapsulates this idea in this quote: "We wish to allow the humblest man an equal chance to get rich with everybody else." There it is, just the chance. When one starts poor, as most do in the race of life, a free society is such that he knows he can better his condition. He knows that there is no fixed condition of labor for his whole life. So that is what we mean by the equality of opportunity. We talked the last Friday before Thanksgiving break about how the involvement of government in income has been somewhat of an attempt to level the economic condition of people. But for the most part, Americans do not want the government meddling in people's personal wealth and personal finances. And we don't want the government taking our hard-earned money and giving it to people who will not work. We believe that when it comes to charity and helping out others, we should be able to choose for ourselves. But when it comes to opportunity, we do believe that everybody should at least have a fair chance to raise themselves up in society. So that, hopefully that makes sense. And especially in education, we want, when, in the early stages of our country, we many of our founders and leaders believed that education was the great leveler that helped, I guess, using the word leveler, it helped level the classes in society. Many people who came to America came out of a society in Europe where there was just the aristocrats and then the lower class. There wasn't much middle class. And if you were in the lower class, you always understood that you were in your place and you were to never basically move up into the upper class. Well, America with democracy, you know, the ideals of democracy and liberty and self-reliance, we rejected that and we said everybody should have the opportunity. In education, we try to have a fairly standard curriculum. And we're talking about here the public education system. We'll get into private schools and charter schools and those things in a little bit, but the public education for students all across our country, we want it to be relatively standardized. That is, there needs to be some common elements of knowledge that we would expect all students to learn. You used to hear about reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's. And I remember when I graduated from high school, you had to have so many hours of math and so many hours of science. I'm assuming it's still that way today. Do you all know if you have to have so many hours of math and science?
I think we just have to have so many classes before we graduate. We have to have so many classes in each one.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be hours. I guess it'd be classes. English, history, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
I guess the subjects that would be outside of that standardized curriculum, things like art, music appreciation. Do your school still have like a music class or an art class, or did they ever?
Have to have half a semester of music appreciation to graduate.
Half a semester?
Yeah.
Or one semester? What about Arcoma? Is there any like specialized classes or like extra
Drama, but that's about it.
drama? Do they still have things like VOAG and used to be called FHA, Future Homemakers, but is it like FCCLA now or something?
Yeah, we have FCCLA.
Okay. VOAG, is that still something?
No. No.
FFA? So, for the most part, if you, let's say you moved from Oklahoma to, let's say the West Coast, like Washington State, or if you move to Florida and you go to a public school there, you're going to continue to have courses such as math, science, English. Those would be what would be the standard curriculum courses. Now, I don't have a slide for it, but something that is not as equal as the curriculum are the communities that people go to school in. And so what we mean by that is using your two communities as an example. Are the slides back up?
Yes.
Okay. Panama and Arcoma, I'm sure, are very similar as far as student size or school size, student population. But I'm sure if we looked at the city government's budget, there would probably be a difference between how much of the taxes in Arcoma go to the school system and how much of the taxes in Panama go to the school system. Now, the amount of money that each school system gets is basically, I think, 90% determined by the state you live in and then your local community. So the financial situation of local schools is really not something that is federally financed. It is pretty much a state and local issue. So again, each community within the state of Oklahoma will, I'm sure many communities have a similar amount, like our three communities, Quinton, Arcoma, Panama. But, if we looked at Oklahoma City's budget, Tulsa Public Schools, they're probably getting more money through their taxes because there's more people. But so the financial situation in each community is a challenge that that's a challenge for us having equality of opportunity. Think about our schools in Southeast Oklahoma. Southeast Oklahoma, which would be right here on the map here, this is one of the poorer parts of the state of Oklahoma. Our communities would be overall poorer than other communities. And so that is going to affect the quality of education. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the arrangement that communities only have to provide for an adequate education, not necessarily an equal education. All right? So every community needs to try to at least provide an adequate education. Now, what this graph shows you is how much each state spends on their school system. So Oklahoma, and this is a 2013 survey, so I wouldn't expect us to have changed much, but Oklahoma is kind of in the middle group of states, spending 6 years ago a little over 30% of our state budget on education. My guess is that has been raised in the last 6 years, especially with the teacher strike from 2 years ago. I just saw the other day on the local news that we have 1,700 more school teachers in Oklahoma on the high school level than we did a year or 2 years ago. So that school strike, that teacher strike helped get our teachers raises, and so we've added more high school teachers. So I would assume this has increased. And then you can compare our state with the other states in our region. And we're higher than New Mexico and Louisiana and Mississippi. We're higher than Missouri. We're lower than Texas, Arkansas, Kansas, and Colorado. Or we were anyway 6 years ago. What this graph shows is how much each state spends on each student, and this is now 7 years old. So, but I would assume that we're still, if you look here, Oklahoma, we were in the lowest group of states, spending $6,000 to $8,000 on each high school student, or each public school student, excuse me. New York is up here as the highest state, spending $18,000 to $20,000 per student. On a federal level, the United States spends more money on students than most countries do. This is from 2014. The United States spent roughly $12,000 per student. Luxembourg is the highest at $22,000 per student, but that is the richest country in the world. Interesting story, my son went on a school tour 2 summers ago to Germany and Luxembourg and Austria, and a bottle of water was $6 in Luxembourg.
Holy cow.
So yeah. Also, the United States has 4,000 colleges, and that includes 2-year schools like Carl Albert, as well as 4-year schools. So we have a lot of universities and colleges. That's because we believe in the importance of education. Now, while we don't have the best education system, we do have a good one that is better than most countries on the planet. Any questions?
No.
So I shared with you earlier that the public education of our children is primarily something that the states and local communities are responsible for. But the federal government does play a role, and the federal government really increased their involvement beginning with the presidential administration of Lyndon Johnson in 1965. Lyndon Johnson, much like FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, who had the New Deal, Lyndon Johnson had a program called the Great Society. He really wanted to focus on domestic affairs, even though he inherited Vietnam. And he really wanted to have a great domestic legacy. So the Great Society was that program, which would, I believe, Medicaid and Medicare came into existence at that time. We already had Social Security, so he wanted to help out Americans medically and also with education. Here you can see that his quote here really highlights that equality of opportunity. Education is the key to opportunity in our society, and the equality of opportunity, of educational opportunity, must be the birthright of every citizen. Notice that he's still referring to it as opportunity. Today, when we hear about healthcare in the debates, many Democratic candidates are saying healthcare should be a right. And so today, 55 years later, we've moved from something being just an opportunity to being something that many believe should be a right. But that's, I'm chasing a rabbit there. I apologize. There's two bills with Johnson's Great Society that I want you to be familiar with. And in your textbook, they are on pages 497 and 498. Both of them were passed in 1965. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act was an act to help with the elementary and high school students. This was a program that schools could apply to and get federal funding to help maybe construct a new building or maybe to buy new textbooks, maybe to hire a specialized teacher. So it was designed to provide funds to help local schools, and they could use it in certain areas, but they had to use it in those certain areas that were specified by the federal government. Like you couldn't use it to, you couldn't get funds just to build a new indoor swimming pool. The federal government would have had certain limitations, like you can, you know, if you do build something, maybe build more classroom space or get textbooks or get new desks, whatever it might be. And one of the key things to this act was the program called Head Start. This was the offering of free preschool to lower, especially lower income Americans, but all Americans could take advantage of it. The other act is the Higher Education Act in 1965. This would deal with your college students. And you can see here probably the most familiar thing with it, which you guys will be dealing with if you're not already, trying to get Pell Grants. Pell Grants, and it could have changed by now, I don't know. But they, at one time, these were grants that were free money to students from lower and middle income families. And when I say middle income, I mean the middle income families that were closer to the lower income families. And really all you had to do there was apply. There was so much money available, so the sooner you applied, the better. And again, that was free money. That was a grant. You didn't have to pay it back. But they also came up with a federal student loan program, which many college students took advantage of. Usually you had about a year, if I'm remembering correctly, you had a year or two after you graduated to start paying it back. And the government allowed, at first, the government allowed banks to give those loans, but eventually it was something that the federal government completely took over. And today, I think student loans are the biggest component of college students getting federal help. So know those two acts for the test. Let's stop there so we can spend some time on the group project. Go ahead and divide up into your House and Senate. And let me just share with you a couple of things that I want you to work on for the remainder of the time, which is not very much time, but I'm gonna give you a good 30 minutes on Wednesday to work on it. Let me